If you have one reservation about trans people in public life, sports is probably it. Most Americans support laws protecting trans people from discrimination in jobs and housing. Most say trans people face real discrimination. Most support them serving openly in the military, adopting children, and using their chosen names. But sports is where all that support falls apart. A 2025 Gallup poll found that nearly 70% of Americans say trans people shouldn't be allowed to play on sports teams that match their gender identity. And that is absolutely by design. In 2015, when the Supreme Court declared same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states, it left conservatives reeling. They no longer had the rallying cry that would bring voters and donors into their ranks. They knew they needed to find a similar issue that their candidates would be comfortable talking about, and they, quote, threw everything at the wall, as American Principles Project President Terry Schilling told the New York Times in 2023. Transgender youth in sports is what stuck. Conservative legal groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom drafted model legislation banning trans kids in sports and sent it to states across the country. The Heritage Foundation promoted it. They tested ads in swing states. They found young white cis women who could become the faces of the movement. They backed similar-looking lawsuits in multiple states. More than 100 of these organizations went on to help create Project 2025, the right-wing policy blueprint now guiding Trump's second term. It's all working. In 2020, Idaho passed the first law in the nation banning transgender girls from school sports. By 2025, 27 states had followed. Then came the bans on gender-affirming care, the Don't Say Gay laws, the drag show restrictions, and the attacks on books and curriculum. Sports bans were the Trojan horse. They seemed like common sense, like a matter of fairness. But once people accepted them, everything else became easier to pass. Today, we're going to explore why sports bans aren't as common sense as they seem. We're going to explore what the science says about athletic advantage, how many trans athletes we're actually talking about, and what's lost when we ban trans people from sports altogether. I'm Ashley Hamer-Pritchard, and this is Taboo Science, the podcast that answers the questions you're not allowed to ask. You hear a lot of confident statements about trans people in sports. Trans women in sports, especially. The science is settled. Biology is biology. Everyone knows that men are stronger than women. Putting aside the fact that trans women are not men, if you don't agree with me on that, I probably won't convince you of anything else. Here's what I want to know. How many studies does it take for something to be settled science? Let's take something that was once controversial. The link between playing football and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head impacts. The NFL denied the link for years. By the time they admitted to it in 2016, nearly 1,000 peer-reviewed articles had been published on the topic. The evidence was undeniable, and the NFL was forced to admit that head impacts in football could lead to CTE. So for a topic like trans athletes, something that's had tons of legislation written about it, billions of dollars in attack ads, 27 state bans, something many people call settled science, it's got to have substantial research like that, right? So how many lab studies have been done on transgender women's sports performance, do you think? 250? 100? Try 5.
And 2 of those studies are N of 1, so just case studies of 1 athlete. And 2 of them have been wrote by myself.
That's Dr. Blair Hamilton.
My pronouns are she, they. I am a research associate in sports medicine and applied physiology. My specialist subject is transgender health and sports performance.
Dr. Hamilton is also a trans athlete herself. She played goalkeeper in women's football in England for 10 years at the grassroots competitive level, before being, as she puts it, forcefully retired. So, 5 studies. Across those 5 studies, researchers have tested a grand total of 43 transgender women athletes. This is what we're using to say that trans women are stronger, faster, and will outperform cis women in any sport.
It's been shoved down your throats that it's a settled science, because what they're using is the differences between a cisgender male and a cisgender female, and saying that gap is 10%, for example, and saying, oh, well, that transgender women only lose 5% of their muscle mass, so therefore they must be in the middle. Problem with that is that transgender women are not the same as cisgender men before hormone treatment.
Think about it. If you're assigned male at birth but feel uncomfortable presenting as male, you're probably going to avoid behaviors that make you look more masculine, like building muscle.
So if you look at transgender women before they transition, their bone mineral density is generally slightly less than cisgender male bone mineral density. Their muscle mass is generally slightly less, because obviously they do not want to have the musculature that sort of out them as male.
There are also some less well-defined differences. Some studies find differences in brain structure between trans and cis people, as I mentioned in the first episode. And if you're avoiding sports because they don't feel welcoming, maybe you feel too uncomfortable changing in the locker room, or with teammates calling you dude, you're going to be less physically active overall.
Even before they take that, that first, pill, patch, injection, anything that completely changes their homeostasis of their hormone regimen, they are already doing stuff that's going to alter their physiology. They're already doing stuff.
So what about after hormones? In one of Blair's studies, her lab tested transgender and cisgender athletes on a bunch of different measures: lung function, grip strength, jump height, cardio fitness, body composition. And they found that trans women did keep some strength advantages, but they also showed clear disadvantages.
If I had to literally give you a headline of that research, was that basically the transgender women couldn't jump. There's lots of different ways that were proposing why that was the case, because we looked at their body composition, their fat mass was completely, was off the scale, right? So they had a lot more fat mass than the rest of the athletes that we had. And one of the things that we found is that their estrogen levels were coming in 2 to 3 times what their norms range should be for a cisgender woman.
Blair thinks they were probably taking more estrogen than indicated so they could see results faster, which led to more fat accumulation. So that extra fat could be a reason the trans women in Dr. Hamilton's study couldn't jump very high. Or it could be something deeper in the muscles themselves. They also found the trans women fatigued faster during intense cardio exercise. When it came to anaerobic threshold, the point when breathing gets heavy and you can't maintain your pace, they hit that point faster than both cis men and cis women. Why? Blair thinks a big part of it comes down to how much oxygen their blood can carry and the size of their bodies. Trans women are larger on average than cis women, so they have more blood. But when their concentration of oxygen-carrying hemoglobin drops to female levels, while their blood volume stays the same, they lose a massive amount of total oxygen delivery, which is why they fatigue earlier. I've actually experienced something similar as a cis woman. During early pregnancy, your body creates more blood, but hemoglobin doesn't catch up right away. As a result, I felt winded just walking upstairs or even recording a podcast in my first trimester. That's what's happening for trans women athletes. Their bodies can't deliver oxygen as efficiently as you'd expect. It's the opposite for trans men. They have smaller bodies on average than cis men and less blood. So increasing their oxygen carrying capacity to cis male norms is like supercharging their cardiorespiratory system. In Blair's tests, they fatigued even later than the cis men. So it's complicated. trans women keep some strength but lose jumping ability and endurance. Trans men actually outperform cis men in cardio. But of course, nobody's out there talking about the unfairness of trans men competing with cis men.
When I came out, the stories weren't so much like this is unfair or this is unsafe. The story was, well, this guy just wants to compete with men and he's going to be a middle of the pack dude. So let's just let him go out there and have a good time.
That's Chris Mosier, a triathlete and duathlete who's anything but a middle of the pack dude.
I mean, I've been on Team USA 8 times, representing our country internationally. I'm a 5-time men's national champion. I am a men's All-American.
He's also an activist. He's the founder of transathlete.com, a resource for athletes and coaches to get information on trans inclusion in sports. And he worked with researchers Ellie Rosher and Anna Beth on a new book that just came out called Fair Game: Trans Athletes and the Future of Sports. You hopefully already know that trans people make up less than 1% of the population. So trans athletes, they're even rarer.
At the highest level of sports, we've seen one trans woman go to the Olympic Games in over 2 decades, since the Olympics had a policy that allowed transgender women to compete. Laurel Hubbard was a powerlifter, competed in Tokyo, and she was actually the first woman out of her category. She did not podium, she did not medal. She was the first person to leave the Olympic Games in her sport in that category.
I just want to underline that. A trans woman competed with cis women in a strength sport and was the first person out of her category. That certainly doesn't match the story we've been told about trans women in sports.
Recently, the NCAA president was questioned on how many trans athletes there were in NCAA, and out of 520,000 student athletes, there were less than 10 that the NCAA knew of. Less than 10 athletes out of 520,000 students. For our trans youth, we don't have exact numbers, but the estimates are shown kind of through the legislative process. So in state after state, as they were trying to pass their legislative bills to ban trans youth from sports, a lot of these politicians could name no transgender athletes in their state. Or the State High School Athletic Association would say that they had, like in Michigan, they had 2 athletes out of 250,000 athletes in the state. In the state of Utah, where Governor Spencer Cox, a Republican, actually vetoed the anti-trans legislation, they had 4 trans kids in this whole state as they were trying to make this law, and only one of them was a trans girl. And so the numbers are very small.
This is made abundantly clear by the cases recently argued in front of the Supreme Court that will decide whether trans sports bans are constitutional. Those cases were brought by 15-year-old Becky Pepper Jackson, who's been on puberty blockers since elementary school and is the only trans athlete in her entire state of West Virginia, and by 25-year-old Lindsay Hecox, a student at Boise State in Idaho. Both athletes tried out for track and didn't make it. Lindsay was banned from club teams anyway. Becky focused on field events instead and placed 3rd in discus and 8th in shot put at the state championships. Lawyers for West Virginia say Becky displaced nearly 400 female athletes in the spring 2025 season, a number they got by adding up every athlete who placed after her in every meet she ever participated in that season. By this logic, literally every athlete who doesn't win first place has been displaced by whoever beat them. Think about the impossible situation this creates for trans athletes. If they lose or don't even make the team, like Lindsay Hecox, they're still banned. But if they work hard and succeed at anything, like Becky Pepper Jackson, they're accused of having an unfair advantage and used as justification for more bans. They can't win by losing, and they can't win by winning. The only acceptable outcome is for them not to play at all. It's almost as if the goal isn't to make sports fair. It's almost as if the goal is to make trans people disappear from public life.
If you look at sports in general, that transgender women, they are all superior, they are all conquering, therefore they have to be banned from the female category. However, in the case of the US military, they are not strong enough to serve. So what is it?
They will try to frame it up as an issue of fairness, but why are trans women being banned from chess, from darts, from fly fishing, right? Like there are certain sports that people have different ideas of fairness. And I would say this is primarily around contact sports. It's part of the reason why rugby was one of the first to categorically ban transgender women. People are always concerned about mixed martial arts and boxing and those sort of contact sports. But there is an inherent risk of injury and safety risk in every sport. It's part of the deal with sports, right? So there is no categorical evidence. There's been no studies that have been on trans people that have shown that trans people cause more injuries to cisgender athletes than other athletes. There's no evidence that says that trans people should not play sports.
Conservative movements have repeatedly used cis women, especially white cis women, as the sympathetic face of efforts to strip rights from marginalized groups. Women falsely accusing Black men of sexual crimes were used to justify thousands of lynchings in the Jim Crow South. Anita Bryant highlighted her identity as a Christian wife and mother as she led the innocuously named Save Our Children campaign to overturn anti-discrimination policies for gay people. Even the defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment came from a cis white woman. Phyllis Schlafly claimed that the amendment's expansion of women's rights would actually endanger women, and the amendment failed. This is a tested playbook. Find sympathetic faces, use the language of protection and safety, and strip away someone else's rights. So when they say that this is to protect women and girls, look at what they're actually protecting women from. Because if this were really about fairness and safety in women's sports, wouldn't we be talking about all the other threats female athletes actually face?
Lot more issues that we should be addressing here, like high rates of sexual assault and misconduct perpetrated by cisgender men in these sporting spaces, right? We looking at things like equal pay. We should be looking at things like opportunities for women to be able to continue to participate at high levels in both athletic and coaching positions. There are compliance that 50 plus years after Title IX was in our country and is being used in this conversation about trans athletes, by the way, still 80% of colleges and universities are not in compliance with Title IX. And so there are so many things that we could be doing to move the needle for women's sports, but attacking the trans community is not one of them.
And in fact, these bans might hurt female athletes even more. Many of these laws assign enforcement to state high school athletic associations, but deliberately don't specify how sex should be verified. That ambiguity opens the door to genital inspections for anyone suspected of being trans. And because many of these bans affect every grade level, that means kids as young as kindergarten. Testosterone measurements are also having unintended effects. Women assigned female at birth with naturally elevated testosterone levels are also now subject to more scrutiny, harassment, and sometimes being banned from their sports altogether. South African runner Caster Semenya was barred from competing in her event despite being assigned female at birth. Algerian boxer Iman Khalif faced false accusations at the 2024 Paris Olympics. Some of these athletes have what's known as a difference in sex development, or certain biological features that lead to more testosterone production. For an incredible deep dive into that, check out the podcast Tested. But sex differences or not, basically all of these athletes are people of color. We're not just requiring cis female norms, we're requiring white European cis female norms. Some of you might be thinking, what's the big deal if a few dozen trans athletes can't compete? They can just find a new hobby, can't they? Personally, I was a huge band geek in high school, and I wouldn't touch team sports with a 10-foot pole. I discovered running in college, but until then, I was as unathletic as they come. Maybe you were the same. So I want you to think about the thing you were into in high school and college. The thing that formed the basis for your friend groups, your feeling of mastery, and your sense of identity. Maybe it was music, like me. Maybe it was drama club or D&D or debate. Imagine how that thing felt to you. Now imagine you were banned from ever participating again. How would you keep in touch with those friends? How would you feel having to get good at something else from scratch? How would you find that piece of yourself again? Sports mean something to people.
My earliest memories of sports go back to being 4 years old, playing t-ball with kids in the neighborhood. And, my uncle was the coach of the team. And it was just a great way to find friends and community. And for myself as a little gender nonconforming kid, it was a space where I found that I could be more fully myself. And I didn't know it at the time, but I think that's why I was drawn to it, was that I was assigned female at birth. I was raised and socialized as a girl, but being a young girl playing girls and women's sports allowed me the opportunity to dress a little bit more masculinely or wear the baggy hoodie and the baggy shorts in at a time when that was not socially acceptable in the other spaces of my life. So I think that I found sort of this feedback loop through sports as a young person where I was a good athlete and I was a great teammate and a great leader. And that was enough for the people on my teams to really love and appreciate and value my presence. And that sort of positive feedback that I didn't get in the classroom or in the neighborhood outside of sports because I was a little gender nonconforming kid made me put more of myself into sports. And then I became better. And then, sort of the loop goes on.
When I actually was back in the day playing high-level soccer or football, whichever way to talk about it, I never planned to go and play in the women's game. I never planned to go play for England for the university's select squad over there. I never expect, that was never a thing. That was initiated by the women's team at my old university in Aberdeen. That was them that said to me, "Oh, why don't you come and play?" Because there was a sports dinner. I was sitting there with the med team, it was 18 guys and me in a dress, pretty much. And they basically "Well, come and sit with us. You don't belong at that table. You belong here." And that's opened up so many opportunities just for them to doing that. I wouldn't be where I was today without them doing that, which I really have to thank them for it.
But in April of 2025, the UK Supreme Court ruled that woman is defined by biological sex. 2 months later, the Football Association banned transgender women from women's football. One day after that, Blair retired from football, 5 years earlier than she had planned. She was a prominent academic by that point, and she still had her work, but she didn't have that outlet.
The only time I ever really got a break from it was when I was playing that sport. It's when I was playing, soccer as a goalkeeper. I only thing I had at that point was literally that ball. Where's that ball? What am I doing? Where am I doing? What am I scanning for? That sort of stuff. But that's the thing I'm missing at the moment is I don't have that. I'm like a dog with a bone. I'm like, where's that ball? What? I don't have that anymore. And you also lose out on the sort of, the community aspect of it as well. I miss the camaraderie with the teammates. I miss going and seeing the girls. I miss laughs, or even the Sundays, like the away days, going in cars, just, and chatting and getting to know people, and sort of playing cricket before the match, all that sort of stuff. Just stupid, silly stuff is the stuff you really miss.
Trans kids play sports for the same reasons as everybody else. It's to be in community with their friends. It's to move their bodies. It's to play, and most of all, to have fun, right? And school sports is part of our educational system. And so there is that component as well. When we are banning trans youth from having access to sports like their peers, we are really taking away a lifeline where not only are the trans kids losing the opportunity to get all of the good things, the core values that sports teaches us, they're missing these opportunities to connect with the other kids in their class and on their teams. But the cisgender kids are also losing an opportunity to be in relationship with and learn more about someone who's different from them, right? And we all have a lot more in common than we have that's different as people. And particularly for somebody, say, who loves basketball, right? You're going to have a lot in common with that person over your shared love of basketball. And that is a common ground that helps us learn about other people.
So what's the solution? Up until this point, most leagues used hormone level requirements. Trans women had to maintain testosterone below a certain threshold. At least one organization has a full open door policy. Australian rules football doesn't require disclosure and just has a safety review policy if someone objects to an athlete's participation. And Blair's research suggests another path forward: sport-specific analysis. Blair and her team created a framework that sports organizations can use to make evidence-based decisions on this. To demonstrate how it works, they applied it to two very different sports: archery and Olympic shooting.
We broke it down and we actually said, listen, let's look at the indices of the sport. Like, what does shooting entail? A stable hold, concentration, visual spatial awareness. Archery, what does it involve? It involves upper body strength. It involves stable hold as well.
Once they'd identified what each sport requires, they looked at how hormonal transition affects those specific abilities.
And we came up with guidelines. We just came up and said, based on the evidence, we said that you should integrate transgender women into shooting after a year and archery after 2 years. Because that's when we felt that with the evidence we found, it should be.
Different sports, different timelines. But the bigger point wasn't just the specific recommendations. It was showing the people in charge of these policies how to do this kind of analysis for their own sports.
That paper gave sports governing bodies the way to do it case by case. If you go through your sport and say, listen, we've looked at how the hormonal transition in athletes of your sport affects it, then fair enough. Like, I have no question. You've done the right science. You've answered the right question.
There's another point of view to consider here, though. All this measuring and assessment to make sure that trans athletes have the same strength and speed and ability as their cis teammates is kind of antithetical to what sports is supposed to celebrate. The pinnacles of human ability, the outliers, the exceptional. Michael Phelps has a 6'7" wingspan. Yao Ming is 7.5 feet tall. Simone Biles is 4'8" with an extraordinary power-to-weight ratio. These are massive competitive advantages, and we celebrate them. And physical advantages are just the start. World-class athletes have access to elite coaches, training facilities, nutrition programs, and equipment that most people will never see. Geography matters. Money matters. All of these create unfair advantages, but we've accepted them as part of the game. So why the obsession with trans bodies specifically? If this were really about fairness, we'd be regulating all biological advantages. We'd be talking about height classes in basketball or wingspan limits in swimming. But we're not. We're fixating on one group of athletes, demanding they prove they don't have advantages that we gladly celebrate in everyone else. That tells you what this is actually about: deciding who gets to belong. Remember that figure from the beginning? The 70% of Americans who think trans people shouldn't play sports that match their gender identity? I don't think most of those people are bigots. I think they're operating on what they've been told. That this is about fairness. That trans women have obvious advantages. That girls are being pushed out of their sports by boys pretending to be girls. The messaging has been organized and effective. It's just not what the evidence shows. The science isn't settled. It's barely started. And the research that exists shows a complicated picture. Trans women lose some advantages and gain some disadvantages. Trans men might actually outperform cis men in endurance sports. Every body is different. The numbers don't support the panic. 1 trans woman at the Olympics in 20 years, and she came in last in her category. Less than 10 trans athletes in the entire NCAA. Single digits in most states, and in many states, literally 0. And what's being lost is real. It's community. It's belonging. It's that one place where you feel like yourself. Blair lost her escape, her team, those stupid, silly car rides to away games. Chris found a space where being gender nonconforming was celebrated, not punished. Trans kids are losing what every kid deserves: the chance to play with their friends. This was never about protecting women's sports. If it were, we'd be addressing sexual assault by coaches, equal pay, the 80% of colleges still not in compliance with Title IX. This was always about what it said in Project 2025: removing trans people from public life. Sports was just the easiest place to start. Thanks for listening. If you're a paid Patreon member, stick around to the end of the credits for some bonus content. If you're not, head to patreon.com/tabooscience to join for as little as $5 a month. You'll get ad-free episodes and bonus clips that you won't find in the main feed. Thanks to Blair Hamilton and Chris Mosier for talking to me. You can check out Blair on Instagram at Blair90X, that's BLAIR90X, and on X at BlairH_PhD. Oof, doing the Lord's work over there. You can find Chris Mosier at thechrismosier.com and on Instagram and Facebook at thechrismosier. The book Fair Game, Trans Athletes and the Future of Sports is available now. Taboo Science is written and produced by me, Ashley Hamer Pritchard. Our sensitivity reader is Newton Shadwakati. The theme was by Danny Lopatka of DLC Music. Episode music is from Epidemic Sound. On the next episode, we're talking about the New York Times' favorite topic, detransitioners. It's more nuanced than either side would have you believe. I hope you tune in. I won't tell anyone.